I was shopping around for the right frame to gift my friends who just got married because I had the cutest photo of them. The FrameBridge website made it so easy to preview options that I slipped in a photo from my trip to Japan for myself too. Now they've got a wonderful memory of their wedding, and I've got a new favorite piece of art in my house. FrameBridge has a curated selection of frame styles and design experts to make it fun and easy to frame what you love for the people you love. Visit framebridge.com or your local FrameBridge store at 1200 Villa Place in Edge Hill to start framing. Today on CityCast Nashville, Vanderbilt professor Bruce Berry joins us to talk about his recent article in the Tennessee Lookout, where he argues that Nashville is a city on the move, but running in place. As downtown keeps growing and tourism thrives, locals are feeling more disconnected than ever. So, what would it take to make a downtown that actually works for everyone? It's Monday, July 28th. I'm your host, Marie Cecile Anderson, and this is what Nashville's talking about. Your article for the Tennessee Lookout points out the tension between Nashville's unstoppable tourism growth and its city core, full of vacant apartments and empty office space. In your opinion, when did Nashville turn into what you call a theme park of intoxication?
Obviously, it didn't turn into it overnight. It's a gradual process through which downtown and Lower Broad started to transform from a sort of a ghost town, in a sense, to a more vibrant place where there were people and things going on and activities. And it's just a sort of a slow thing over many years that it evolved from a busier downtown with a few honky-tonks to a even busier downtown with some more hotels and some more honky-tonks. And then ultimately, in the late 2000s, a massive convention center, which brought a lot of tourist trade of the convention type to the city. And so I think it's really over this period from the early 2000s to the present that it grew into the theme park that you referred to.
All right, we obviously cannot have this discussion without mentioning that your spouse, Megan Barry, was the mayor of Nashville during the heyday of the hit ABC television show Nashville and all the growth that came in that It City era. When you look back at her tenure, what do you see?
It's interesting to think about it in relation to that specific period. So the It City thing, of course, literally the phrase It City grew out of a New York Times article that I believe appeared in, I want to say 2013 or 2014. My wife, Megan, was elected mayor in 2015. And it certainly was at a time where the city was riding high in a lot of ways. Although if you actually think back to that political campaign in which she was elected, her opponent in the general election, David Fox, was trying to raise some concerns about growth and about the nature of the city's economic trajectory. He was especially, I think, focused on the metro budget aspect of it. But you're right. I mean, that was exactly the period. If you wanted to identify the high water mark for the city's growth, it was probably in that period, 2013 to 2018, 2019. And as I say in the piece, there was a kind of a recognition or a sense that the city was going through a period of really expanding cosmopolitanism. You know, it wasn't just that there was tourism growth downtown with some more bars and tourists and conventioneers and such, but also that the city itself was gaining in a kind of a cosmopolitan status outside of itself during this period. People wanted to come here. People wanted to be here. I'll give you an interesting example from my own line of work, teaching at Vanderbilt, being on the faculty at Vanderbilt. Whenever we hire a new colleague, a new professor, we're having to convince them typically to move to Nashville, to want to be in Nashville, Tennessee. And I can remember during the 90s, that was an interesting challenge. I mean, if we were recruiting a prospective hire coming from not in the South, we really had to sort of sell Nashville. And then what happened in the 2000s and especially in the 2010s is suddenly everybody wanted to be here. we no longer had to sell the place. We always had to sell our department and the university and the job and such. But it got to a point where we didn't actually have to convince people to be interested in Nashville as a place to live, no matter where they were coming from. And that was, I think, a real interesting change. And part of the reasons I was thinking about what made me write this piece is I think that that's crested, and I think we're headed back to a period where we have to convince people to move here, because I feel like the city is sort of standing still in terms of its broader reputation. I mean, its reputation as a place to go have a kind of an intoxicated tourist weekend is unmatched. But what about its reputation as a place to live, apart from that country music tourism downtown? That's the question I was trying to raise.
A ton of people are still moving here continuously, but is it appealing to the same kinds of people as it was back in 2014 through 2018?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm not sure I can answer it with much specificity, because you're sort of asking, I think, a question of complicated demography. I mean, where you started that question, a ton of people are moving here. I mean, that's a little more complicated than just that, right? I mean, yes, certainly there is population growth. We can see those numbers year over year. But a lot of that population growth is in the ring counties outside of Nashville. Davidson County's population itself, sure, has grown over the years, although that growth has been closer to steady. It's the counties around, the sprawl, that's really growing. And those counties are wrestling with some really complicated growth issues of their own, right? Having to do with public services and whatnot. And so when we ask, who are the folks who are moving to Nashville, the city itself and the core of the city, I'm not sure we have good data to answer that question. I mean, one piece of data I did mention in the article is the fact that we've built a whole bunch of tall, gleaming new apartment buildings in and around downtown, the Gulch, places that didn't even exist 20 minutes ago that we give a name, like North Gulch. And there are very high vacancy rates in many of these tall rental buildings. Have we overbuilt? The reporting on it suggests that the people in the apartment business think, oh, it's all just fine. It's all just the give and take of the market. But I'm not so sure. Are there still sufficient numbers of people who want to move to Nashville, take office jobs, live in tall, high-rent apartment buildings downtown, especially given, how the post-COVID era has yielded a lot of hybrid work? And when you combine that with the cost of living in the center of the city, there are some real questions, I think, that we are not confronting directly. Another little statistic that I mentioned in the piece is that we are seeing higher than the national average vacancy rates in office space downtown. So it's not just unrented apartments; it's also unleased offices. And those are warning signs, and those things cannot be addressed with tourism. And to the extent that we focus our attention, as the Chamber of Commerce often does, and as the Convention and Visitors Corp always does, because that's their job, if we focus our attention on the vibrancy of downtown and measure that in terms of tourism growth and tourism tax growth and hotel room occupancy and all these other metrics that the convention visitors folks use, none of that's going to fill apartments or lease empty office buildings. That's just going to fill hotel rooms.
How would you suggest city leaders pivot to fill those spaces?
That's kind of above my pay grade, I think. And it's above the pay grade of city officials, too, because it's not something, they can do by fiat or through legislation. The real question that I was trying to raise with the piece, and that I guess is the way I would answer your question here, is it's about the conversation we're having about what our city is, and especially the city core, and how it got to be that way and where it goes from here. I have a link in the piece to the strategic planning that the Convention Visitors Corp has been doing to predict on into the future. And by the future, I mean on into like the 10-year future, into the mid-2030s. And I'm looking in front of me at these line graphs of projections where 50% more hotel rooms sold year to year, doubling growth in the lodging tax, hotel tax revenues year to year, and such things like that. And visitor spending, massive growth over the next 10 years in visitor spending. Those are great trends if all you care about is visitor spending and tourism growth. And it's not that we will always be a tourism-focused economy in this city. The point is not to abandon that. The point is we've let that crowd out serious conversation about actually what we want our city to be. The idea that we all know, because we talk to each other, I don't have any data on this because nobody's polled it, but we all know that Nashville is filled with lots of adults who want very little to do with downtown Nashville, who will tell you, like, yes, I'll drag my relatives who are visiting down to the honky tonks one night. Many would say, like, I'll put them in an Uber to go to the honky tonks one night because they can go without me and wander around. I mean, we those of us who appreciate the cultural amenities of downtown, apart from Lower Broadway's music scene, the Ryman, the Skirmerhorn, obviously the things that go on at the arena, the Predators and whatnot. We go downtown for these things, and then we escape, and we don't otherwise go. And I think there's just a ton of people in Nashville. I would challenge the Chamber of Commerce, which has plenty of money, including, I think gets some of its money from the city probably. I would challenge the Chamber of Commerce or the Convention Visitors Corp to spend $30,000, $40,000 of that money and do a good poll, a good public opinion survey on what Nashvillians think about the center of the city and downtown and how they use it, interact with it, or wish that they could. Because we should be talking about that. It's not, my appeal here is not to do away with the tourist economy of Nashville. It's essential to what Nashville is, but let's reckon with the fact that a really good city has a downtown that its citizens engage with, not just one that's a theme park for tourists.
Remember that amazing little cafe you discovered last summer with the perfect latte and crazy view? Or that sweet hiking spot your friend told you about, but you can't remember the name? Well, with Overlook Maps, special places never get lost again. Create personal lists of places you've been and want to go. Build your must-visit list for your next vacation, your foodie favorites for date nights, or your weekend getaways when you need to escape. Share your favorite hidden gems with friends and family, or go on and keep your secret spots completely private. Planning a trip with friends? Create a shared list where everyone can add their ideas. Visiting a new city? Check out lists from locals who know the real gems, not just the tourist traps. And here's the best part, folks. No ads cluttering your lists. No one selling your data to advertisers. Just your personal collection of amazing places, organized exactly how you want them. Overlook Maps. Collect, organize, and share the places that matter to you. Download free at overlookmaps.com and check out overlookmaps.com/Nashville to see some of our lists and great spots on a map and in your pocket. Your places, your way. Well, one thing we're doing right now at CityCast Nashville is talking to gig workers. And so we talked to a rideshare driver. We just talked to a bartender who works downtown, and she has worked there for 25 years. And so obviously we know that downtown is a huge economic driver for our city, for the people that work here, our entire state. But like I said, these people rely on the jobs down there to make a living. But then so many of us hate going down there as locals. How do we balance our dislike for downtown with the reality of our neighbors who depend on it?
Maria, I'm so glad you brought up that angle on the topic, because the nature of the labor market downtown and the labor economy downtown is really important to understand as part of it. Of course, it's a big economic driver for the city. There's no question. A lot of people work there. And by the way, when you actually look at how that labor market works, there are some people who are treated quite well, and there are some people who are treated not so well. A lot of the honky-tonk industrial complex, if you want to call it that, is a good deal of it appears to be exploitative, in the sense that the labor practices make for a difficult way for people to earn a living, and that includes musicians working down there, as well as other service people, bartenders and servers and all the rest. It's something we should not lose sight of. The people who are the sort of guardians, the kind of corporate and economic guardians of the tourism economy downtown, and especially the honky-tonk economy, they want us to view it as this kind of phenomenal cultural asset that defines Nashville and positions us as this kind of iconic cultural enterprise for the world to come and see. The problem is, it's only partly that. I mean, to a great extent, you have a whole bunch of musicians down there who are, basically country rock jukeboxes trying to eke out a living so that they can live nowhere near downtown because they could never afford to do so. And so this idea of the brand and the Convention Visitors Corp, regards Music City appropriately as a brand, and they talk about the value of the Music City brand. I'm looking at their recent strategic plan, and I'm quoting the Music City brand. I'm quoting from their document, is an established, globally recognized brand that defines Nashville as an authentic, friendly, and unique city to experience. Authentic to an extent, but to a large extent not. Friendly, absolutely. Unique, certainly, but uniqueness is not necessarily an asset if it's, just a unique theme park. I guess my plea is, let's stop trying to gussy up the brand and let's talk a little bit more about what the actual city behind the brand is like and try to take control of the conversation about that city's future. And, you might ask me, how do we take that control? My answer is, I'm not exactly sure, but we need to.
Well, I'm glad we're talking about the future now, because let's discuss the East Bank development. It feels very important to talk about as we discuss all this. So, as its vision was allegedly designed in a process that included the priorities of community members, but right now it looks like that discussion around the East Bank Boulevard and the bike lanes, that no longer exists. It appears that they don't care so much about our priorities anymore. What's your take on that change?
I mean, it's a concern, certainly. When the East Bank Vision Plan was being sold to us 2 or 3 years ago, there were attractive renderings of a magical utopia of a new East Bank that included, especially with respect to that idea of a boulevard and transit, a multimodal dreamscape, which fits with the conversations, of course, we've been having about transit and transportation in the city. And so now we find ourselves 3 years later where there's actually starting to be conversations about actual things that might actually be created on the East Bank, one of which is, of course, that big boulevard and what it would look like. And suddenly we have some who are involved saying, maybe it just needs to be 3 lanes in each direction, just like all the other pikes in this town, because we got to move a lot of cars. And we have others, especially the kind of transit forward folks like Walk Bike Nashville, a wonderful organization on whose board I sat until recently, saying like, wait a minute, what about the dream and the dreamscape? What about that? And, we'll see where this goes, because I think it's premature to say, oh, we've been screwed and this ship has sailed and we're getting the boulevard that some want and others don't. I mean, this is still a conversation. It's a little disturbing to me that in that conversation over these last couple of weeks and months, there's been some confusion about who actually can decide this.
Right, who's in charge?
Who's in charge? It was not encouraging to hear, I guess, somebody speaking on behalf of the mayor's office saying like, well, the mayor doesn't build roads, so not our jam. And that I don't think that went over well in Freddie Land very well. But it isn't clear. And, partially, of course, I guess to be a little fair, the creation of this East Bank Development Authority around taking a part of the city where there isn't much and trying to turn it into something massive and significant for a long-term future. That's always going to be an improvisational effort on the part of the institutional entities and forces like the East Bank Development Authority. But it's not a great look for a first take on some development over there beyond just the hulking stadium. It's very hard to get things moving quickly in this country, except apparently professional sports stadiums. Those things can be just sort of greenlit and built in a hurry.
Right. All right, finally, you wrote, many look around downtown Nashville and think, well, better this than the hollow shell of commercial decay it was 30 years ago. That's not an insane position, but you can also look around and ask, who did this to us and how do we make it stop? Who actually then holds the power to shift our trajectory, and what will it take for them to act?
Long, pregnant pause as I ponder that question. It probably has to start a little bit with the city's leadership, and that's tricky. I mean, it'd be easy to say like, well, the mayor needs to lead a different conversation about the city. That's hard to say because the mayor has a city to run. It's a tough job. It's hard for a mayor to convene a broad-based conversation that is sort of deeply thoughtful and philosophical about the future of the city. It would be nice if a mayoral campaign would engage that kind of conversation. And it would be nice if perhaps someone, maybe a mayor, maybe influential members of city government, could engage influential members of the corporate community to rethink this. Obviously, the corporate interests in town that are invested in tourism are invested in keep going with what we're doing. But there are big business and corporate economic interests that aren't necessarily invested that way and might be just as frustrated with the direction of the city as some of us are who are not, again, similarly invested. What good leadership could do is engage those folks in a serious conversation that might then induce an influential group like the Chamber of Commerce to not just be on the tourism train all the time. It's about changing the conversation, I think, is the first place to start.
Well, yeah, so the mayor is incredibly busy running the city, but is the mayor even able to exert control over our tourism board and convention and visitors center corp?
Probably to a limited extent. I mean, certainly, the mayor leaders have pulpits, and they can certainly use those pulpits, and they can spend political capital to try to shape the conversation. They don't have the kind of control that would just, pivot the city on a dime, and I'm not sure I would advocate trying to do that anyway. But I'll mention this because I mentioned it in the piece. The folks who run the convention center, the Music City Center downtown, have done a study and have put it out there that, maybe we need to do a major expansion of this thing. It's not as big as some other cities' convention centers, and we're turning away a lot of business, they say, because we're not big enough and we don't have enough hotel rooms to expand it and such. An attempt to expand the convention center would be an excellent inflection point to convene this conversation, because for me, on the surface, a massive expansion of the convention center sounds like an insane idea. Why should we just automatically do that? The fact that we are turning away business because other cities have larger convention centers is not a reason to enlarge our convention center. We may have just the right one for our city and what we want it to be and what role we want convention tourism and other kinds of tourism to play in it. But let's have a real conversation about that and not merely look at this as some kind of business decision about how to optimize the revenue that convention tourism produces.
What can our listeners do to shape the conversation? Because if this convention center thing becomes real, how should we raise our voices and make it a real conversation?
Well, that assumes our listeners, as you call them, agree with me or want to try to do that. I mean, obviously, some listeners would disagree and say, no, let them grow. But, the way to try to at least tap the brakes on the momentum that might lead to that kind of expansion is obviously to, first and foremost, plant the appropriate bugs in the ears of your members of the Metro Council. I mean, that's how political conversations in this city works, and they bubble up through the council. No doubt at some point, some massive convention center expansion would require a council vote on some aspect of it. And if you don't have the votes, you can't do it. I mean, just look at the politics around the racetrack to just pull something out of just left field. The idea of, rebuilding that thing, entering into a big arrangement with the Bristol folks to do some massive rebuild of it, that it's been on the drawing board for a few years. It may or may not happen, but it's a nice illustration of how community reaction really does make a difference. I mean, the reason that thing just didn't get steamrolled 2 or 3 years ago is because there's a lot of variation in opinion around it, around the city, and people are making those opinions known. So we do have a system that sort of works in that respect.
Bruce, this really has been great to talk to you. We'll have to have you back on for a whole other episode about the racetrack, because I feel like
I was not trying to tee that up. Thank you.
Coming back, Bruce Perry, everybody. And folks, if you have an opinion on this, we want to ask you to join the conversation. So email us at nashville@citycast.fm. And Bruce, thank you again.
Marie, my great pleasure to be with you.
That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. And don't forget, you can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Nashville neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell your friends? Rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Nashville newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Doodles!